vicinity. You were just 10 kilometers away. And so this happened overnight. Trump introduced these 30% duties. There's a lot of caveats on it, and that's why we're going to discuss this. And let's try and find out what is the implication, how does it impact us, and what is about to happen with this thing. Dawie, do you know exactly what's happened? What is
I don't think anybody really knows what's going on. But the way I understand it, at least everything is we're uncertain about many things. I'm certainly very uncertain about many things. As far as I know, only a limited number of countries received a letter from Donald Trump. Not everybody, but a few countries. If I'm not mistaken, 12 of them. Yeah. So, and South Africa is a really tiny economy. So why did he decide to send the letter to South Africa? And my suspicion is because South Africa is important for him. It's certainly not important from an economic point of view, because we're just too small. So obviously there are political motivation, political reasons behind him actually sending a letter to South Africa and a couple of other countries. And I think that's the important point here. Donald Trump clearly is unhappy. It's not a trade thing. He's imposing all these tariffs on South Africa, and that can't be the reason, because we are just too small. So clearly the motivation behind this must be political as well.
Trump introduces trade duties on a couple of countries, and I think when it applies to South Korea and Japan and these places, then it's economic nature. In our case, there's a different reason.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, things like, for example, and again, I think he's really being a little bit unfair here. He referred to the BRICS countries. They're currently meeting in South America. And he mentioned that he's going to add another 10% tariff on the BRICS countries if they do un-American things. I suspect things like supporting Iran, for example, is an un-American thing. But for some reason, the Indians are treated much better than South Africa and the Chinese and Russia, for example. And they're also part of BRICS. So it is about politics, and that's why it's so important for the South African government to make sure that they stay on the good side of Donald Trump. It's not about economics, it's about politics. It is for sure.
I mean, India has a huge trade relations with China. But Trump is in a good relationship with India as well. So he excuses them. But he doesn't.
The Indians have a different approach to this.
Exactly.
They are managing this relationship much differently. Well, so the big question would be, what can we learn from it? Because it seems of all those BRIC countries, apart from Iran, of course, we are making we are doing all the wrong things in this relationship. My first question to you from the farmer side, and pardon me for coming with this selfish farmer's hat. Out there are quite a number of nut farmers, wine farmers, citrus farmers, who now wants to know, what does this mean for me? There are shipments currently on sea.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but this is what I think, and everything keeps on changing all the time. From the 1st of August, you will, or rather, if they import anything from South Africa, there are a couple of exceptions and a couple of other items that we can talk about. Yeah. But the general rule is, if something is sent from South Africa to the United States, from the 1st of August, you're going to pay a 30% import duty or a 30% tariff. The question is that who's going to absorb this? Is it going to be the exporter out of South Africa? So how much pricing power do we have out of South Africa? Or is it going to be the importer in the United States? And I think the answer to that is probably a combination of the two. Depending on things like, for example, the exchange rate of the rand. If the rand weakens suddenly, as an example, then there's room for the South African exporter to accommodate some of this increase relatively easy. While the opposite is true if the rand appreciates, for example. So the general rule is, if you export something to the United States from the 1st of August, you're going to pay 30% on an import duty or a tariff on that. It will have some implications, of course. It will disrupt trade to an extent, which will affect the South African economy, which will affect all sort of other ratios. Things like, for example, inflation in the United States, potentially, interest rates locally, eventually also the exchange rate, economic growth, debt to GDP ratios, all that sort of stuff. So, but it is disruptive, And that in itself, the fact that we have uncertainty and the fact that it is disruptive in itself is not good for trade and therefore not good for economic growth.
Can you elaborate a little more about the impact on the exchange rate, Dawie?
The South African currency, just a bit of a background. The South African currency is a small currency. Maybe just a little bit further back. South Africa is a tiny economy. We must understand this, that we are a tiny economy. And relatively speaking, the South African economy is getting smaller. South Africa 30 years ago was a giant on the African continent. We're not a giant on the African continent anymore. Many of these poor countries caught up with South Africa, and we've been falling behind some of the richer countries. South Africa per capita GDP basis today are poorer than 17 years ago. So we are a small country. We have to understand that. But despite that, we have an exceptionally sophisticated and well-managed financial system, which means that our currency, the rand, trades very frequently and very actively with many other currencies in the world. In fact, the South African currency, the rand, can be seen as a barometer of world stability. Quite often what you find, if something goes wrong, even if South Africa is not involved, if something goes wrong in the Middle East, for example, the rand weakens. Because it's easy to sell the rand, to short the rand, and quite often you can see the exchange rate of the rand as a barometer of international instability or stability. Having said that, there are a couple of other things that make the South African currency, the rand, very attractive. One is that interest rates in South Africa are very high. In fact, if you look at capital market interest rates, the yields on a capital market, that is the highest in the world. So making it very attractive for foreigners to put money in South Africa. But on the other hand, we've got very weak economic growth, for example, and the rand, and I do a calculation, and this is how I do this. I look at the purchasing power parity, that's a Big Mac index in a way, a little bit more sophisticated, but basically that's what I do. Then I calculate the correct value of the currency based on this. That's my starting point. And the correct value of the currency is approximately 9 rand to the US dollar. And then what I do, I look at how much the rand deviates from that purchasing power parity level, and I work out an average over time, and it depending on what period of time you look at. And then I see where the rand usually trades, and I look at deviations and so on, and then based on that, the rand, based on purchasing power parity and its undervaluation over time, it should be trading at about 17 or 17.5 to the US dollar at the moment. Clearly at 18 or close to 18, it is weaker than normal. So what's going to happen to the currency? If we get some stability, or well, let me rephrase that, if nothing major happens over the next couple of weeks or so, I expect the rand to stabilize somewhere. That usually happens, and gradually start appreciating a little bit, 17.5, maybe even below 17. If there's some sort of good reaction, some deal between South Africa and Trump, for example, the rand can easily go to 17 to the US dollar. If there's some further additional tariffs against South Africa, the rand go to 18. And if there are real financial sanctions against South Africa, the rand easily can go to 20 rand to 21 rand to the US dollar. So you asked me what's going to happen to the currency, and I gave you all sort of possibilities. So I can't give you a specific number. My best case scenario is to look where the currency is trading at the moment, and it's trading at 17, 18. That's always, if you want to make a prediction on anything, just look where the market is trading now, because all the information that is available is factored into that one price. So I can't give you a number, but I can give you arguments why the rand can go weaker or stronger based on the scenarios that I've just sketched.
There's a 30% duty in terms of cars. That's 25%. Now let's just talk about cars a bit.
Motor cars.
Motor cars. What's the impact, Dawie?
Yeah, but there are other factors that we have to keep in mind as well. Things like, for example, electric cars, especially Chinese electric cars, is really taking over at least the electric car market. And secondly, the Chinese motor car industry is really shaking up the world's motor car industry. I think a couple of other points is that South Africa's technology that we use in South Africa is relatively old. We have to renew our factories. And generally speaking, people are not working in factories anymore. The people that work in factories today are IT managers and artificial intelligence experts and so on. People, Henry Ford's idea of a factory, they do not exist anymore. We have to understand that factories today are very, very sophisticated places. And that's just important because Donald Trump wants to move all these factories back to the United States, and many of them are moving back to the United States. But nobody wants to work in a factory, and anyway, people don't work in factories anymore. Only those very expert people like what I've mentioned. So what does it mean for the South African motor car industry? We're losing market share because of the Chinese. We're losing market share because our technology lags behind. We're losing market share because investments lag behind, because the environment is not very conducive for investments in South Africa. So the answer is the motor car industry, despite many years of subsidies, basically, indirect subsidies.
50 billion.
Many years of that, and we still cannot compete internationally. So I'm not very positive about the outlook for the motor car industry.
I got the impression that, and that's just my impression, that the car industry, motor car industry, cost South Africa 50 billion in terms of subsidies.
Yes.
Just to attract the manufacturing opportunities it creates. But if and I wonder if the South African government is starting to lose interest in the motor car industry. No. Yeah, you say no, but you know, when China exports to us, they pay 25% import duty on the Chinese car, and that 25% is an income for the government. To retain BMW and Mercedes-Benz and Nissan and who else is here? To keep them here, it costs us 50 million. And I wonder at what point government says, let the Chinese just take over this market.
Yeah, no. I think there's first of all that billions of rands that is being paid by you and I. Whenever you go and buy a car.
No, I understand.
Yeah. So it's us.
No, that's us. If I say government, I mean it's us.
Yeah, so us, we pay that.
Yeah.
But the second very important point is that the motor car industry, and you can give us a better indication on that, I think labor is quite well organized in the motor car industry. Yeah. And of course, I suspect that they are members of COSATU, and that's part of the...
No, I think that plays, it costs us money. Yeah. But it's for the purposes of employment opportunities.
Yes.
I think that's the better thing, because if these guys withdraw, that will cause huge instability in all the areas here in Roslyn and in the Eastern Cape. But it's just an interesting thing. And now there's the 25% duties. All that plays into a quite complex situation for the motor industry. And Mercedes-Benz already indicated that they are tuning down their activities. And there's questions about what's happening in Roslyn as well. So what is the impact of this for the 25%?
I think, again, maybe we could just stand back for a moment and see what's been happening to South Africa's secondary industry. That's the manufacturing industry, our industrial base in South Africa. And we have been deindustrializing for many, many years. This is not the first time something like this happens. We have been losing our factories. In South Africa, we've got two major potential growth components. The one is the primary industries, that's agriculture and mining, and the other one is the service industry or the tertiary industry. The stuff in between, the factories, we've lost many of those. And this is just another example. And the reason why we're losing those factories are things like, for example, macroeconomic environment, but also things like a lack of necessary skills, for example, and the requirements like BEE requirements and all social, political requirements that create an environment that's not conducive. Load shedding is a major one, and so on. So we're losing our factories. And if there's one place where we need more investment, more economic growth, it is actually in a secondary part of the economy, the factories, because we can potentially create a lot of jobs in that specific sector. We don't. And that's part of the reason for high levels of unemployment, because we're losing our factories. It's very difficult. We grow in the service part of the economy, but there you need very special skills. And the quality of our education is so horrible that we just do not produce people with the necessary skills. And the result of that is very high levels of unemployment, I'm afraid to say. And this additional 25% of motor cars in South Africa is just another step in a deindustrialization of the South African economy.
Sorry, Theo. Continue, Theo.
Last week when me and Gerhard were in Washington, we did not miss an opportunity to plead for us not to be kicked out of AGOA. You can understand for many farmers, AGOA is extremely important. And the answer they gave us is that decision to kick us out has not yet been taken. And that we understood that there's actually still a chance that it might be saved. But they also said maybe this new tariffs dispensation will bring an end to AGOA altogether. Now, I must confess that I simply do not understand the relationship between AGOA and these tariffs. Can you explain that part?
I also don't know, but I can't see how we can have AGOA plus these tariffs. So I think we have to simply accept this as a fact that AGOA is gone. I can't see how
Donald McKay spoke to him last night. You know him. He said to me, AGOA died last night.
Yeah, I can't see how we can have AGOA.
That's it.
At this moment, it is still on the books.
It's still officially on the books. Yeah. But if the duties are introduced, then it overrides AGOA altogether.
Yeah. That's my understanding as well.
So, is our understanding correct that what the duty says is there's a duty, come and talk?
Yeah, I think Donald Trump's door is always open. You guys will know better.
Yeah.
But I think the door is always open. If you come, he's a deal guy. Yeah, he likes deals. So go to him and say, listen, this is the deal. We're going to do certain things politically, internationally, and I can give you a list of things that we can do politically to position ourselves differently as far as the Americans are concerned. And then, of course, there are some issues that we have to do locally as well. Expropriation is a good one. We have to relook at things like BE, for example. And our position regarding Iran is another one. Our position regarding Israel is another one. Fix those sort of things. And remember, this is politically driven. And I'm sure Donald Trump's going to say, listen, okay, you guys have been playing
Dawie,
ball.
That is exactly that. But goodness, you asking government to give away their arms and legs. I mean, these are the arms and legs of the ANC. That's the ANC. So they must sacrifice their ideological.
This is not much ideology. This is more political grandstanding. But ideology is a problem as well.
Yeah, well, some of it. I mean, what is happening with Iran and Israel is one thing. That's not ideology. I think that's just military convenience and greed that drives that. I think so.
That's political grandstanding.
And then there's ideology. BE is. I mean, what is BE? There's just a mixture of a bit of it's economic nationalism.
There's an element of the ideology as well, because essentially what BE does, the rules of BE are determined by the political whoever's in charge of politics, and that's a centralization. And that's typically socialist.
But the point is, all of these things are very bright on the screen of the Americans at the moment.
Well, if you look at AGOA, sorry for interrupting, if you look at AGOA, one of the requirements is you must protect private property rights.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And what's expropriation?
Well, exactly.
We already actually knocked ourselves off that bus.
And on top of that, remember, we're not supposed to be on AGOA because we're a middle income country. We're not supposed to be part of the AGOA agreement in any way.
Yeah.
Well, if I look at the very first reaction from our government, they say we must urgently look at diversification. We must look at alternative markets to the USA. How possible is that, Dawie? How important is the USA as a market?
There's a saying in economics, when you talk about money or banking or monetary policy, is that your central bank is the lender in last instance, which means you can help and assist the banks, whatever, but if you're really in trouble and nobody else can help you, you go to the central bank, and the central bank will give you money to survive, and central banks do that. If we look at the United States is the consumer of last instance. It is the last consumer in the world. It's the biggest consumption market in the world. It's the biggest economy in the world. They are the world's consumers. If you can't do business with the Americans, this is a huge disadvantage where you find yourself, because everybody wants to do business with the Americans, and Donald Trump in a way is correct with that, and that is the world, everybody wants to export to the United States because it is the biggest market. If you lose that, you have to find alternatives. Fortunately, there are some other countries that are growing very nicely as well. Obviously, the Chinese is one of those examples, but they're still quite poor. Then there are some other countries which will make it a little bit more difficult, like the Russians, for example. The Eastern Europeans, or even the Europeans, but you guys will know better about that. And the Indians, that's also a market, but it's relatively small. So to find alternative markets, we are already exporting to some of those countries, but it's not going to be that easy because everybody is not competing with that, especially if tariffs that are applied to the rest of the world as well. Now, all of a sudden, we're all running to the remaining bone that is left, like a lot of dogs running for one bone. It's going to be a bit of a fight to get into those other markets. The reality is that we simply have to understand that we have to improve our productivity and that we have to see what we can do in order to get new markets, but we have to compete on price and, of course, on quality as well.
While we were there, we had discussions with serious business people there. They say, we want to do business with South Africa. There's lots of things to do with South Africa, individual businesses in the agricultural area, and there's many other things. Now, they pointed out, I mean, these 30% duties were looming quite a while, and they were called by our by other Southern African countries, all of them. And they went to these businessmen and they said, help us. We want to do business with you, and there's these duties. And these businessmen said to them, no, we'll help you, because we have access to the American state, and we can make your case, because America does this for America. So when you go to the America and say, listen, this is when an American businessman go to a state department of trade and says, this group of people, this country want to trade with us, let's make it easy for them. What will America do? They will make it easy for that country.
Yeah.
And they said everybody came to the table, and they're working hard to make deals, because they say, how can we approach this? America says, open the markets to us. South Africa didn't utilize that opportunity. They just didn't. And and then, of course, even if they want to, there's this ideological block, stone, that stands in the way, because it's not only deals. I mean, if America wants to deal with Kenya, that's trade.
Yeah.
Of Botswana, that's trade. But not in the case of South Africa. Mm-hmm. That is, trade is almost, it's not the first thing. It is get the political stuff out of the way. South Africa is now a little stone in the shoe of the Americans. But that little stone is a big thing for the ANC.
Let me ask you something, and maybe you can answer me that, or maybe you. I've got the impression that the South African government waits until it's too late before they start doing stuff.
With everything.
Yeah, it's not only this.
No,
they should have been there a long time ago.
Absolutely.
And they should have started talking with the Americans a long time ago.
But they're not talking with the Americans. They've started talking. The embassy in Washington is non-existent.
The message we got there was this discussion in the Oval Office, and then there was this meeting afterwards, and the South Africans came from that exercise saying, well, we've spoken now, everything is going to be all right.
Yeah.
But that was not the agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And then the way we understood it from the Americans is some document was then drawn up. And at the G7 meeting, the idea was to kind of quickly stop them in the corridor and say, hey, there is a document here. Can this embody our agreement? But it never happened. The opportunity never presented itself. And then the time came closer and closer. When we were there, it was a week away. Now we are there. They did nothing. The Americans said to us in very clear terms, when we say we are going to do it, we are really serious about it. We asked, what can we do? Because for our constituencies, for our farmers, for the employers in NEASA, it's going to be devastating. We are the ones who will get hurt. They say two things. We don't want to hurt business in South Africa. You are not our enemies. Our problem is a political one. But secondly, We told them when they were here, the government went with the golfers and Minister Steenhuisen and Mr. Rupert. We told them, and we told your embassy, this is the bar. And they think it is a very low bar.
Yeah.
There are these 4 things. We want you to declare farm attacks, farm murders a priority crime. Let the Hawks investigate it. We want the ANC, not the government, as in certain papers it was reported. We want the ANC to distance themselves from kill the farmer, kill the boer. We want an assurance that market-related compensation will be paid in forced transactions as determined by a court of law after due process. And fourthly, we want American business. When we invest there, we want them to be exempted from BEE. They said, this message, we have not picked it up in South Africa, and we monitor everything. Would you mind to convey this message? That evening, instead of going to dinner, we said, let's quickly compare notes. We have to put out a media release on it. And we sat together and compiled it. Then we sent it to those officials and said, this is what you asked from us. If we send out a press release like this, have we interpreted you correctly? And they actually changed the word there and some grammar there. And then
boere sukkel bietjie met die Engels
partykeer. Die Engels was nie op hulle standaard nie. And then they said, yeah, we are comfortable with this one. So the press release which went out had their consent. And they says, this is the minimum. Hence, we've sent it out. But we still got the impression that even after today or after last night, they are still prepared to look at a proper offer. Why do you think our government got to the cutoff date without making that offer? And apart from these 4 more political conditions, economically, what can we offer them? Given that you say we are a small economy, we're a small country, what is attractive which we can offer them, which will make them change their mind about doing business with us?
The first comment that you make is that, well, I try to get the answer. What can we do to make it attractive? What can we do from our side to get the Americans to stop with these tariffs in South Africa? Maybe before I get to that, let me just tell you this. There's a lot more that they can do to hurt us, the Americans.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot more. I mean, you mentioned more tariffs and things like that, but individual sanctions is possible. You know about this. It's certainly possible. Financial sanctions are certainly possible. And I mean, this is not Donald Trump. If he really gets angry, there's a lot more that he can do. But what can we do? From an economic point of view, we can say, listen, okay, you get access to our markets. There are some import duties against all countries in the world. So it's not complete. We can do those kind of changes. But that's not going to make any difference to the Americans. There's only one thing that we can do to get the Americans to look at these tariffs again, and that is there must be some political concession. There must be a change in things like, for example, our support of certain international organizations or certain other countries in the world. And of course, locally, there must be an ideological shift. An ideological shift in terms of, for example, like compensation and maybe even being.
And that goes to the heart of the ANC.
Really nothing else. But the question, why did our government wait so long? I just cannot answer you that. I think the only answer that I can get to that is that we have an exceptionally weak political leadership in South Africa. Is it that they don't care? I mean, the levels of unemployment in South Africa, the poverty in South Africa, we've got children dying of hunger in South Africa. Absolute levels of poverty are increasing in South Africa. And the politicians don't come to the party. And it's not only the ANC, by the way. I can tell you right across the board, I think our political leadership in South Africa is really weak. See, for example, the budgetary process. See what happened to the most recent thing, the firing of this way that all politicians manage this whole thing. Our political leadership in South Africa that we have to be, well, let's use the word, be ashamed of.
But if the question is why didn't they do anything now? First of all, the general rule is they don't do anything about anything in time. That's the general rule. But in this case, with the conditions, what can they do about it? And unless they're prepared to walk away from their economic, ideological closeness and vision, the way they want to do things. I mean, they are socialists, period. They want to expropriate. They want to take control of the economy. They want to control the economy. They want to re-engineer society. That's what I want to do. And I mean, I spoke to somebody last night. I mean, he sat in the inner circles of the government, and he says to them, we've got to, and this is comes from a purely economic point of view. And he says, we've got to change this. And he refers, and when he refers to certain things, they say to him, but this goes down to the heart of, for instance, BE. And the answer is, we can't do that. Now this stands in the way of everything. BE stands in the way. This is hard economic of social re-engineering. And that's what I want to do. And the Americans says no. And I mean, they say exempt our companies from BEE. And they say, we're not going to do that.
Because they see it as a non-tariff trade barrier.
Yeah, they say, we're not going to do it. Now, this stands in the way. And now, if you say, why didn't they go longer? Why didn't they go to the United States a while ago? With what? What do they have to offer? Because that might just be the first thing on the table and say, no. Take that out of the way. You want us to trade with you? Take it out of the way. First thing.
Actually, we don't have BE in South Africa. We do not have that. Because real broad-based black economic empowerment means world-class skills development, education, means working local authorities, means electricity, means water, means a safe environment. That is real broad-based black economic empowerment. What we have in South Africa is selective billionaire black economic empowerment.
That is what we're referring to.
There's nothing broad-based.
There's nothing broad-based about that. In fact, the majority of black people in South Africa are suffering because of this incompetent, destructive government.
There is no doubt about it. So when I refer to BE, I refer to that negative part of BE.
So there is a function on our broadcast whereby those who are viewing the direct broadcast can post a question, and you are very welcome to do so. If there are any questions, can we see it on the screen, please? And then I want to ask Dawie to take a look at it, and if there's any more research you quickly need to do.
No open questions so far.
Can I perhaps just talk about one or two other things that are important as well? Because it's not only South Africa and the relationship with the United States that's important. There are some other changes happening between the big countries in the world as well that we have to be aware of. One is that the US dollar is losing its value. It's losing against the euro and is likely to continue. I see the dollar is trading at 117 to the euro at the moment, and I think pretty soon we're going to see the dollar trading at 120 to the US dollar. So that's something that we have
to the euro.
To the euro, for example. So the euro is gradually sort of becoming a little bit more acceptable as a reserve currency, but it's a long way still to go before anybody is going to topple the US dollar as the world's most important reserve currency. In fact, the second most important reserve currency today in the world is actually gold. And gold's its traditional role. So that's something that we have to be aware of. We also have to be aware of that there are certain relationships between the Americans and the Chinese, and the Americans and some other countries, and Americans and Europeans as well. The relationship between American and Europeans is not what it used to be. And there is an opportunity for South Africa, because I've seen at the G20, for example, that the European leaders are very, very friendly with our political leaders. But the Americans, so they perhaps, and I think this is an opportunity for the Europeans to stick a finger in Donald Trump's eye, perhaps. That's part of the reason why they're doing that. But maybe there's an opportunity for South Africa. Rather go see if we can make more inroads into European markets.
Although the Europeans, I mean, I've sat in meetings, they have a huge problem with our version of BE.
As well.
Oh yeah, no, that's huge. I mean, that is if they are so upset, so they're not going to invest here. Not with that. They are investing here, but they are reconsidering investing in South Africa. It is simply impossible. I mean, the employment equity arrangement that applies to South African companies now applies to European companies and American companies. That's crazy. How can you do that? So we do everything we can to make us an attractive as possible to the world.
Not only to the world, to South Africans as well.
To us as well.
South Africans also do not invest in South Africa.
Absolutely.
So there's a question, what is the latest in terms of AGOA negotiations? We kind of have already touched on it, but Dawie, apart from that, it seems from the limited literature I had in my hands this morning that there are kind of different levels, that there are still some products which have a zero tariff, and then some have a less than 30% tariff, and some stuff have a 50% tariff.
Yeah. See, obviously the certain resources that we export to the US, they do not they do not mine platinum groups metals, for example, so we can export that to them duty free. And then you know some of the other issues in the motor cars and steel, for example, there are various other tariffs on that.
Steel is 50%. Steel and aluminium is 50%. But previously if I talk about previously, currently, because these duties come into operation 1st of August. So if I say previously, I'm referring to a dispensation and up until the last day of July. Companies who exported to the United States, because there was already steel duties in place. This is Saai now, but they could apply for exemption, and the company on that side to which you export then applied on that side for the exemption, and they got it. And I'm not sure whether that may apply to all these products. I'm not sure. I can't say whether that's going to continue. So there's a bit of uncertainty around it. I don't know whether that still will apply. But 50% for steel. Now remember, if you look at steel and aluminium, and steel industry is one of these industries that's seriously deindustrializing. It's a huge job creator
and energy.
And we first of all can't buy cheap steel because there's an import duty on steel. So you buy steel expensive, and when you beneficiate and export to the United States, you need with another 50%. So take that into consideration. You buy expensive steel. Steel is expensive, and when you try to buy cheaper steel, you hit with an import duty. When you export, you hit with another 50% export duty. So, if you take those two things in consideration, you're more or less put out of the market. Is, if you take both of this into consideration, say, but how can I trade? So, on the long run, that might turn out to be very, very serious.
There's another question. What is your advice to South African entrepreneurs in terms of diversifying, or said differently, how can South African entrepreneurs best protect their single most important asset, that's their businesses, given the trajectory of the economy and politics in South Africa? Now that's a mouthful.
Yeah, there are a couple of answers to that. First of all, I think we have to make a distinction between your capital, that means your savings in simple terms, and the second one, your other capital in the form of your business. Those are the two differences. So what do you do with your investments? And this is an asset manager talking now.
Yeah.
And the answer to that is that you have to make sure that you're properly diversified. Make sure that the chunk of your assets are invested abroad, and get the necessary financial advice, and very important to get the correct structures in place. If you open a bank account in London in your personal name, that's not diversifying internationally, because if something should happen to you, get the money back is a nightmare. So that's as far as normal savings are concerned. Make sure you're properly diversified, and the other normal investment advice. As far as your business are concerned, a couple of things are important. Firstly, make sure that you are safe in South Africa. It's a dangerous place. We know this. This is a major obstacle to investment, and it's a dangerous place. If you have to pay for security, and if you have to pay people off because you want to do business, all that add to cost. So be safe. That's the first requirement. And then the normal other things apply. And that makes, for example, identified risk in your specific industry. It could be whatever risk, it depends from industry to industry, and manage those risks. And then two other things are important. Make sure that you're on top of your skills remain relevant. The world out there is changing very, very rapidly. And if you don't keep on sharpening up on your skills, you're going to fall behind, and we are competing in a very competitive world economic environment. You must have the necessary skills. And South Africa is a major problem with that because of the quality of our education system. And then lastly, make sure you make use of the most advanced forms of technology and know how to use that. And you guys, your farmers are doing a brilliant job on it. Because if you look, farming today is not a primary industry anymore. Farming today is actually part of the service industry, because you've got geneticists, don't even go to a farm. You've got people that are IT programmers or whatever, they don't even go to the farms. I mean, some of these tractors send the messages to whoever. So you cannot be, there's no more room for a farmer in the world. You can only be a farmer if you're living in some third world country where you're a subsistence farmer. But if you're not a businessman with the necessary skills, you also will not make a success in the farming or the agricultural industry. And that's what our politicians must understand, the whole thing. That the value add, you still need a piece of land. But that's not where the value add really comes from. The value add happens with what you do with that land, which include things like skills and technology and stuff like that. You can give people all the land you want to, but if they can't use this in a competitive manner, they will not be successful entrepreneurs in the agricultural industry. So those are some pieces of advice that I have for the farming industry specifically. And I've got a couple of industries that I particularly like, and farming is one of that. And something else that's happening to our farmers. Our farming industry today is becoming corporate businesses. In the past, Papa was in charge. He was the owner. He got financing from the bank. He harvest it and give to the corporations. That's not how farming works today. You've got a chairman, you've got a board, you've got a corporate setup, you've got an internal audit committee, and there's separation between management and ownership. So farming has become a corporate business today. And I think our politicians, and quite often some of our farmers, don't only know
but
this.
Deer's constituency are family farmers, and huge component of NEASA's business are family businesses. It's all businesses below the level of being on the stock exchange is family businesses.
Yeah, but it's important,
yeah.
And I'm sure you see this. I mean, there's an old story. The first generation starts building it, the second generation makes it big, and the third generation destroys the whole thing. That's the story usually. What is happening? You can start off. All businesses, or just about all businesses, are family businesses. Yeah. That's right. But once you reach a certain size, then you have to understand there's a difference between ownership and management.
Yeah.
You have to separate the two. Boetie is nie noodwendig die beste persoon om die plaas te bestuur nie. Get a professional manager.
Yeah. Now we understand.
Maar selfs familieboere doen dit, nee. A vast majority of small and medium scale family farmers today have a different structure for the ownership of the land and a different structure for the management of it.
Yes. The operations.
And that applies to business as well.
Yeah. That's one way of mitigating risk, by the way.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, the ownership of the farm, for example, you can externalize that. You can give it to some international organization.
Yeah.
And there are certain structures that you can place to do that.
Absolutely. Is there another thing?
Is it possible that 10% tariff on countries that side with BRICS could be added to our 30% still, and then the steel and automotive 25% that remains and does not jump to 30%.
That one I'm not sure about. I'm not sure about that one because the motor car, that 25%, I'm not sure if has been adjusted upwards to 30%.
Well, no, I understand that today I was informed by an expert that's 25%, but steel is already on 50%.
Yes. So motor cars remain at 25%.
So far.
Okay, but the other part of the question is this additional 10% from the BRICS countries. That means an additional on top of that, on the 30%.
There's a threat. That's a sword hanging
over.
It
might go to 40%.
If the BRICS countries keep on doing un-American things, And an un-American thing in the eyes of Donald Trump is supporting Iran, for example. That's an un-American thing.
And trying to develop an alternative to the dollar.
Yeah, which is not going to happen. We spoke about that earlier.
Yeah. Good. Here's another thing. Is it possible for business and industries to apply for waivers or exemptions directly with thereby circumventing our government failures? Well, that's what I've said earlier on, that the company, I don't know whether that will apply in terms of the new arrangement from the 1st of August, but currently you can. With the place, the company to which you export, to apply for an exemption, and that is the case currently, and companies have been successful with that. So, if an American company goes to the Department of Trade and Industry and says, I want to import your agricultural stuff, and it's quite necessary for our market, then it might just be the case that Trade and Industry in America says, well, is it in our interest? Yes. Okay, let's do it then. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure whether that's the case, but currently it is the case. And I mean,
in a way that is unfortunate. In a way that is unfortunate, because this is going to create all sort of exceptions. And at the moment you have these sort of but then the things become messy.
But we don't know whether that will apply.
I guess that is possible. Yeah.
That is possible. We don't know whether that is applied. But I mean, that is definitely one avenue that people can explore.
So I think organized business must try to approach the Americans with something like that.
Yeah.
Dawie, we have spoken about these tariffs now in terms of the threat it poses to our economy and to our businesses and our livelihoods. Are there opportunities?
Yeah, one potential opportunity is that the currency that is a bit weaker. So I guess you can use your currency as a sort of a price mechanism. I guess the other opportunity, you will be forced to start looking at other countries. Another opportunity in a way is that, like what I said earlier, is that we will be forced to become more productive, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So I guess, yes, there could be. Only the good guys are going to remain. And in terms of agriculture, there are no more bad farmers left in agriculture. So I guess there are always opportunities
I guess the biggest opportunity is that there's another screwdriver putting on the pressure now on our government to review its policies.
That is perhaps, eventually. But are they gonna yield? Are they gonna eventually accept that they have to look at the quality of government and they have to look at policies of government and the efficiency of
something's got to give.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a bit skeptic. I know that's what they have to do, but at this moment they're weighing up their own personal interests. That's what their version of BE, for instance, gives them, versus what's in the interest of South Africa, and I think greed currently.
But there's something else that is changing. Let's try to get to a bit of a positive angle here. Is that for the past couple of months, suddenly everybody's talking about BE. Of course, Donald Trump played a role there and something. But everybody's talking about how damaging this, the way that BE is.
A few months ago.
And it was pretty much a taboo. Now we're discussing it, and many business people are calling it openly, and so that's good. So the pressure. There's certainly a lot of pressure on this economy, but the pressure is piling up on government.
There's
good thing.
There's no doubt about it.
And should they yield to this pressure on being exempted from BEE, the next moment the Europeans, the Chinese, the Chinese are already exempted, hey? But all other exporters to us and all other investors will say, what's so special about the Americans?
They will demand
we want the same benefits. And how can you give more benefits to foreign investors than to your own citizens?
That is true.
Let me just say, and I'm looking at the financial markets. I spoke about the rand being more weak than usual. But if you look at the South African other assets that we have in South Africa, if you look at the JSE, for instance, that is a cheap market. I mean, that is such an attractive market. If we look at South African bond market, and I referred to this earlier as well, that is such a cheap market. If we just implement the right policies, just eat a little bit of humble pie, I mean, those markets are going to run. If the JSE runs by 20 or 30% or 50% even, it's not impossible. If the bond market runs by another 200-300 points, for example, the huge financial injection on the South African economy. It's that we can lift economic growth up easily within a year's time.
If
3-4%.
there's business confidence in us.
But you can get confidence by changing your political
Well,
stance.
that is
The market is telling you, listen, this is, as they say, a low-hanging fruit.
huge potential.
So we're paying a price for this incompetence and the wrong macroeconomic policies and the political grandstanding of the ANC.
Guys, we've been on air for an hour now.
Yeah.
Thank
you,
you.
anything you want to add? Say.
Well, I have a new item to pray for. The saddest part of this is it's not rocket science and it can be done. And if it would be done, just imagine where we can go.
And we don't need 20 years for this. We can do this within a couple of months.
Yeah, we can. Okay. Last thing from your side, Dawie?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest problem that we have in South Africa is not economic, it's politics. We all know that. But I got a sense that people in South Africa are shifting. And I used to be a bit scared of democracy. I'm not. Democracy in the end is going to fix this, and it's our responsibility.
Yeah. You and Dawie, thank you very much. It was good.
Dankie.
On short notice, this was lekker. Baie dankie.
Dankie.
Laat weet maar vir my as jy is ons nog daar. Nee. Laat weet maar vir my as jy
Wat is om mobiligheid?
Dat jy lang geld wil altyd vat.
O, ja.
Dis nie so moeilik om dit te
Ja.
Boer vertel my nou die dag dat hy 'n